So this is my build of the Stealth F117. The kit's the Academy kit. It's an old tooling from 1991. The cockpit is basic on the kit, so I upgraded with a resin part and some PE parts. I was unable to buy a Bombay replacement, so I ended up scratch building my own. There aren't too many parts to the kit, and the plastic is a sort of shiny black plastic, but it's a sort of plastic that you scratch very easily when you come to sanding. If you've built any number of model kits, you probably know what I mean. So using my Tamiya craft saw, I cut the waste off the resin parts. I found the instructions for the resin parts to be slightly unclear, so it was a bit nerve-wracking starting to chop away the cockpit. But you know, at the end of the day, it's only plastic. You've got a plastic card and glue, you can fix it. It took a number of attempts before I was happy that the fit was good, and I had to grind down the inside as well. The easiest way to do this, of course, is to just use my Dremel with an attachment. It's pretty rough, really, but it works. A quick test fit to check that it's fitting okay, and it seems to be okay at the moment. A quick shot of the PE parts on the dashboard. Quite early on I decided that I wanted to try and see if I could fit LEDs into this 172 model. So here I am drilling some holes out for those lights. Not having messed about with LEDs before, it was a bit of a trek into the unknown for me. This is the lights on the wings, just nipping those off because they're just represented by a piece of plastic and putting some holes in. And obviously I did a bit of research on where the lights are, and here I'm just testing the LED on the wing just to check that it works. The biggest challenge for me was fitting lights onto the undercarriage and where the wheels are, because there's 3 landing lights on each of the undercarriages, and they're very small lights. The Bombay represented nothing near what it's actually like, so, and not having the resin part, I decided to scratch build my own, and so grinded the original plastic out and started to fit a load of bits of old sprue and bits from kits and wires to try and represent what the Bombay looked like. This did take a little bit of time to do. It looks a bit rough when you're doing this sort of stuff, but once you get it in place and prime it, paint it and pick out the details, it's surprising how authentic it actually ends up looking. Finding reference photos was the hardest part for building the Bombay, but I found some YouTube videos where the guys are doing a walk around a Stealth, and they put the camera up underneath and you can still see the Bombay. So I took some screenshots and used those for reference. So I super glued the resin part in and used some green putty to blend in the gap. I super glued some car wheel weights into the front forward looking infrared unit represented as a ball bearing. So a quick shot showing the inside where the wires are. Because it was an old kit from 91, there was a lot of flash and seam lines and bits that needed to be cleared up virtually on every single part in the kit. So that's what I'm doing here. And by far the biggest challenge was fitting the landing lights onto the undercarriage. The plastic representations are just minute. So obviously I had to start with snipping off what was the representation of the light. Then I just put a small saw cut into the undercarriage to let the wire slip into that little groove. The light on the front was by far the biggest challenge, and I've got a bit of old sprue and drilled a hole through it that would take the micro LED. So, and then that would just slip inside that. And then I pinned it on with a small piece of wire, slipped the LED into the hole, and then the wires would act like hydraulic wires actually on the suspension. And I was very lucky because it worked. The next issue was, how on earth am I going to get this to set? So I used UV and put a drop of UV on it, stuck a UV light on it, and then that set it quite nicely into that piece of plastic. And the good thing about UV, of course, is it's translucent, so it will act as a lens for the light. And of course, a quick test to check it still works, and there we go. Here I'm just putting a drop of UV on to create a lens. And then after that, when it comes to painting, obviously I just put a drop of masking fluid on the lens and then take it off after everything's been painted. The LEDs took some time, obviously, but once they're done, it's just a case of putting the rest of the kit together. Here I'm putting the V-tail on, or the rudder vader, and this was quite tricky. So a quick aside, I didn't have a canopy mask set for the canopy, and I'd come across somebody who said about using silver foil. This is for lagging, for heat foil, but it cuts with a slight sticky back. Now this is a Lancaster canopy, and I'd put this foil on some 3 months beforehand, and I wanted to see how it would fare with the foil on it. This is me discovering for the first time, and actually it worked really well. So I proceeded to mask the canopy of the Stealth Fighter with the foil, and the canopy though is extremely fine lines. It was a challenge, but the foil is so sensitive, it does pick up the lines, and eventually once you play about with it and get a toothpick on it and rub it in and connect it, it works brilliantly. Canopies have always been a bit of a bugbear of mine, so I put some NATO black on the canopy and decided to get it on there quickly and get the main colour on. The thing with canopies, I found that if you leave the paint, it tends to harden so much and cure so much that when it comes to taking the masks off, it ends up cracking the paint. So what I do now is I do the canopies as quickly as I can. So I spray this on, and when I'm happy with that, I'll put the matte coat on, and then I'll just whip that canopy straight back off, and the whole process done in a day or two. So the paint hasn't cured to this hard, brittle texture that it will go to in the end. So this is my paint mule. I wasn't actually happy with just spraying the Stealth Fighter black, because basically it's not. It's a shade of grey, and they vary a lot as well. So this is an old Revell Lancaster I've got, and I use this just to test paints on and colours, and I'd recommend everyone have a paint mule. So basically this is me testing various colours. So when I compared it to the picture, and I thought, no, still very much the wrong colour. So what I'm doing here is putting the small LEDs into the wings, and you need to set all the LEDs in before you can paint it. And to set these in, you don't use super glue because there's a chance that will short circuit the LED. So grab yourself a bit of UV and the UV light, and this stuff actually makes really good glue as well. And you just stick a drop on there, stick the UV light on, and then that will be solid. So I thought, whilst we're watching this I'll have a quick chat about the LEDs. These particular ones are very small. They're called microlights, and they are 0402 LEDs. They are wired with resistors already, and okay up to 12 volts. And the flashing lights, which are on the top of the model, are slightly bigger, and they're 0805s, and they're resistor ready also to 12 volts. So it really is very simple, providing you can use a soldering iron, which is worth learning because it's pretty straightforward. And this UV soldering iron, these microlights, they can make some ordinary plain models, which, let's be frank, this kit is an older model and is pretty cheap to buy, and you can really turn them into something quite nice. It's worth giving it a go if you're thinking about it. And if you want me to put a little video together, let me know in the comments, please. I'm happy to do that. Obviously there's a hole on the outside, so now I'll just put a tiniest little drop of UV light on there to represent the lens. And when that's done, give it a quick test, and there we go. Obviously I only needed 2 wires coming out of the plane to go to the battery, so it was a case of putting them all together and putting one of these heat shrink tubes over all the wires, and leading into just 2 wires coming out. They were a bit higher grade than the bit of a stronger wire than the ones on the LEDs, because obviously there's a little bit more voltage going through it. And now I'm using the solder just to bring the heat shrink wrap onto the wire itself. A quick test, see if it works. And there we are, it's all working. A bit more plain assembly, and this photo, that picture is really good because you can see the scratches on the plastic, but they will come out, so no need to panic. Just using some Mr. Surfacer Primer 1000 on the plane, and that will help to smooth out all those little minute scratches that are on that black plastic. I used a 3000 grit sandpaper to just sand back the roughness of the primer and get away all these imperfections. So eventually I did hit on the colour, and I used XF1 flat black, flat white, and a drop or 2 of yellow to just warm it up, and I was pretty happy with that colour for the Stealth Fighter. Now I used some flat white and flesh, I believe, or tan, to create highlights on the panels to give differential, and I did that all over the plane. And say when you study the photos of the plane quite a lot, you'll see all these different sort of shades and paint variations and so on. That done, it was just a case of spraying the main colour over with a few light coats. So the mix is thinned down more than you would normally do it, perhaps. Maybe a 70% thinner to a 30% paint, and then sprayed at a relatively low PSI, so you're not chucking it on, so it goes on nice and steadily. And just a few light coats, you work around nice and gently. Don't try and cover everything up. Sometimes you find that if you put too much on, you think it's left, and then when it cures, it's actually dried so much that it's took the pre-shading away. So a few light coats and just steadily go around, perhaps leave it and then come back to it, and eventually you will get a few coats on and you will have a very nice effect. I just sprayed up the undercarriage, and obviously because you've got the wires hanging out and you can't put them back until everything's sprayed up and finished, something you've just got to work around. And here I'm just about to spray the Bombay and the undercarriage in an off-white colour. And it's just a case of spraying some details. The intake grills were a strong flat black. Picking out some details on the Bombay doors and the undercarriage doors. Spraying up the weapons. I used MIG's Olive Drab. And then starting to get the Bombay doors and weapons all assembled. I painted some red brick colour I'd mixed up previously for my Vickers Wellington build and used that on the weapons. Picking out some details for the cockpit. There was a big gap on the cockpit, so I had to put some plastic card in, cut it to shape, sand it, stick a bit of filler on it, but spray it up, all looks good. So here I'm just trying to get some close-ups of the cockpit, pretty much failing miserably, but it's about the best I've managed. The exhaust system is quite unique on the Stealth Fighter, and the closest colour I could get was a bronze. So I used Tamiya's bronze to achieve the colour. Time for gloss coats, for getting ready for the decals and weathering, and I use Mr. Colour Super Clear. The decals are minimal on this kit, so it doesn't take long at all to put these on. Let's see how that masking worked, and oh, that's not too bad. Oh, not too bad at all. So putting the optic on to the end of the bomb and using a bit of chrome marker pen, a drop of UV light, and I think you'll find that that will produce quite a nice looking optic. And there we are. A time for some weathering. I'm using Flory's light wash, putting that into various areas on the aircraft, which when you look at reference photos are typically what's showing white and lighter colours. Flory's washes are clay based and can be wiped off with warm water or hot water. Let's get some of the weathering done on the Bombay and undercarriage, and I'm using a bit of Mr. Tamiya brown wash here just to muck it up a bit after all that work. Yeah, just create some effects there. So I'm using a reference photo of the undercarriage of a Stealth Fighter, and it's quite heavily stained. You can probably just see it in the picture, so I'm just trying to recreate that somewhat. It does look a mess, but it's authentic. It was just a case of rinse and repeating on the top side. There's not a terrible amount of weathering required, but there is a bit of weathering required. Using VMS's XXL matte coats, I sealed in all the weathering and put on the matte coat. That done, it was just a case of setting the canopy onto the top of the model, a little bit of super glue, and then make the diorama. So this part is very straightforward. It's just a piece of foam cut into a strange hexagonal shape, and I chose to do the weird angles to reflect the weird angles of the Stealth Fighter. I scored a piece of card which I later glued onto the foam base, and then this is to represent the sections of the runway or inside the hangar where the concrete would be laid in various sections. Then I just widened the gaps with a tool, and once that was done, I then painted it a sort of concrete grey colour, weathered it off, and I also painted a yellow stripe on, and I'm just using acrylic water paints here and to get a colour that sort of represents the grey of a concrete. Any sort of grey would do. And then I had some figures already left over from another kit, Aircraft Ground Crew, and I just set the plane and those figures onto the base once it was done, and it came out okay. I super glued all the figures on. I actually super glued the plane onto the base as well, so it becomes a permanent structure. I super glued the battery pack onto the edge of the foam, and this became a complete unit in itself. So the plane and all the figures and everything is glued onto the base, so I can just pick it up and move it around without fear of small figures and bits dropping onto the floor. We're coming right to the end of the video now. I don't show all of this. I really hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe and like, and watch to the end.